Thank you very much. Thank you. Afternoon, Madfest. I just want to say at the top, please forgive me if I seem to be moving a bit awkwardly on stage. I strained my neck at the weekend. I can't actually move my head all the way around that much, but I think given the theme of this week's event, it seems only appropriate. I physically cannot look backwards. I can only look forwards into the future with you all. Now, my name's Chris. I work for a market research company called GWI. We specialize in audience targeting. We run the world's largest survey on the digital consumer. I don't quite have time in this session to go into all the amazing things that we do. But suffice to say, we have a lot of cool data at our fingertips. And what you're going to see in the next 15 minutes is, in my humble opinion, some of the coolest of the lot. Now, I used to do these things a lot more often for understandable reasons. And I don't know if you guys remember this, but around about late 2019, early 2020, whenever we spoke about Gen Z, it was always very much in the future tense. Everything was very much what these guys are going to do when they get some spending money, when they enter the workplace, when they start coming of age, all of these sorts of things. But of course, in the past 2 years, that has happened, largely under our noses. They're not holed up in college campuses anymore. They're colleagues of ours. They've sent Kate Bush to the top of the charts. They're making Minions, this weird kind of meme box office smash thing. And the amazing thing is, I think you can pinpoint when this transition happened, or maybe started to happen, quite precisely to the middle of the night, in the middle of the summer, in Midwest America, where a young woman with the Twitter handle local celeb turned to her phone in the middle of the night and posted this tweet. "I'm awake at 3 a.m. and just want everyone to know what Gen Z says about millennials on TikTok." And you might remember this. There was a few articles written about it afterwards. And she attached a whole bunch of screenshots that I just think are too good not to repeat here. So we have, they'd be talking about Harry Potter houses, but they can only afford a one-bedroom apartment. You're thinking about the wrong ones. There is also quite a few other ones attached, but my personal favorite comes from a young man with the name NBAyoungthot, who gives his name to this presentation. The pictures don't seem to be loading quickly enough, but I can remember it off by heart, so don't worry about that. He says, "They be 34 talking about I'm a Hufflepuff, like grow up and do a line of coke already." To which the only logical response, as many people did, you can't quite see on screen yet, is to immediately nominate him for the Nobel Prize in Literature. So kudos to you, NBAyoungthot. We salute you. The Academy will be in touch before too long, I'm sure. Now, there's many things we could say about Gen Z, and the guys before me quite rightly pointed out that you can't really generalize generations. There's too many facets to their personality. You know, age is one thing, life stage is another. You might have kids at 22, never been to college, you might be doing a PhD, all sorts of things could happen. But there's many things to be said about that. But you can see in the summer of 2020, this tweet and all the kind of commentary that came around it, it really seemed to struck a nerve. Because it was around this time that Google's search traffic for Gen Z overtook millennials for the first time, where it stayed pretty much ever since. And I don't want to say this one tweet caused all that, but I just think it arrived at such a perfect moment. Not only are these guys getting older, but also there's the lockdown context, they're stuck at home, communicating with each other, consuming content that seems relevant for them online. And of course, they've got TickTok, which at the time was their space, you know? It was a social media that wasn't infested with older people, with their parents, and it was a place where they could be themselves, get a kind of cultural consciousness, if you like. Now, as the guys before me pointed out, there are many caveats, shall we say, with doing generational analysis, doing a kind of generational segmentation in marketing. And people will rightly ask, well, how can you make these generalizations? Aren't young people, or haven't young people always been the same? But the amazing thing we can do at GWI is that we can compare Gen Z now with millennials when they were that age. This is the missing ingredient for a lot of people. And if you see the kind of changes, certainly in terms of what they talk about online, you can see some quite profound differences. So in the UK, for example, alcohol is just not part of the agenda for young people anymore, certainly not to the same degree. They're much more sober curious, they're less likely to drink alcohol. I'm just not sure it's the same cultural rite of passage it once was. In this country, gaming, always been quite popular, but in certain parts of the world, it's becoming their main cultural space, more than film, TV, music, anything like that. And they're far more politically engaged as well. If you imagine the next election, how young people are going to talk about it on social media, and compare that to 2010, when it was much more genteel, I'm sure you can understand the difference is pretty stark. Now, the guys before me also talked about diversity and the importance of diverse topics. And these guys are the most diverse generation yet. They're the most diverse in and of themselves, and they're the most accepting of diversity. And there's logical reasons for this. You think about patterns of migration, movement of people, society tends to get more liberal over time. It makes perfect sense. And it applies to a number of topics, race being one. The guys spoke better in the last session than I ever could. But sexual orientation is another one I find very intriguing. I was actually at the Lord concert at Ali Pali last week because my partner's a fan. But it was so striking seeing the kind of people who are going there, how they were dressing, their engagement with LGBT culture. I think if you compared it with, say, my generation of people when we were that age, again, it would be quite a stark difference. And again, something else I fully jump on board with from what Worth and the Curb are saying, there's a certain, well, let's say Greta Thunberg was probably the first Gen Z celebrity, and I think she cemented that idea of the young environmental activist in everyone's minds. But it's a very complex topic with a lot of nuance, but the main headline is don't be suckered by the okay boomer trope, that young people exclusively care about the environment, that older people don't, that older people are culpable and young people feel they've got to fix it. It is important to them. It is something they care about. It is something where they have brand demands on. But they're not really unique compared to everyone else for that. They're largely in the same bracket as other age groups and even the off-the-line baby boomers. Now, I would wager if we did a kind of word association thing with Gen Z, climate would come up quite quickly, but anxiety would as well. And that is one that is quite accurate. In the Hall of Fame of iconic tweets by and about Gen Z, this one often does the rounds. Unfortunately, we don't do research on things like tear gas canisters and verbally abusing racists, but that last bit is definitely true about being too nervous to make a doctor's appointment. Gen Z are much more likely to say they're prone to anxiety than other generations. Now, the amazing thing is all age groups are about equally likely to say they're comfortable talking about mental health. So the fact that this number is higher, that this bar is bigger, it's not just because they're more comfortable saying it in a survey. I couldn't tell you what exactly is causing this anxiety. That should be investigated on its own. But it is genuine, for want of a better word. But there's an interesting polarity here in that while they're anxious, they're also ambitious. You know, the guys before me alluded to a kind of hustle culture, and I think that's a very astute observation. Now, many of the things that you see on screen are kind of truisms of young people throughout the ages. It's easy to be adventurous, to feel ambitious, to think that success is important at the start of your working life before you're ground down by years of crushing disappointment. But there are other important differences. There's research that's been done elsewhere that shows how when you grow up in the kind of financial climate that I, and I'm sure many people in the room did after the financial crisis, you do become much more financially cautious. Gen Z have grown up in the kind of crypto bro era, and where you can make something of yourself online as well, that kind of side hustle culture that the guys alluded to. And TickTock, I think, is going to be a really important engine of this change. I still don't think we fully wrapped our heads around how powerful this platform, this algorithm is at taking someone from obscurity into fame, basically overnight. We've seen that journey with Francis Bourgeois. It's hard to imagine another time in history where someone with an interest where, to be fair to him, it is quite niche, would become so big so quickly, the face of the Gucci North Face campaign. And I wanted to share these numbers as well, because I find these amazing. Charli D'Amelio used to be the most followed creator on TikTok. She isn't anymore. It took her 9 months to get 50 million followers, and no one knew who she was. She wasn't a celebrity bringing a huge pre-existing fan base like some of the names you see on screen. I just think TikTok, it dangles that idea of instant fame in front of people, and I think it really cements those ideas of ambition, drive, hustle, everything else we've heard about. And I should point out, it's not actually the most popular platform overall at the moment. That is still Instagram, but it's growing, people love it, and it will be the driver of the cultural agenda in the years to come, as the Kate Bush running up that hill example shows quite well. Now, a quick word on the subject of memes. Memes are grammar. For young people, memes are grammar. What does he mean by that? What does he mean, memes are grammar? I'd wager for a lot of us in the room, if I asked you to imagine a meme, this is the kind of thing you're thinking of. This is what I grew up consuming on social media. I'm sure many of us did. It's the very classic macro, advice animals, top text, bottom text thing. Even if you don't know what one of these is, or even how to make one, it's pretty clear what it's doing. There's a sort of visual setup, punchline kind of thing going. You kind of digest the message. Whereas the memes that Gen Z tend to use and share, and they do share them a lot, which is why I'm telling this to you, They're much more self-referential, they're more offbeat, they're more surreal, they're much more of an in-joke. And the reason why I share this is because I know there's going to be people in this room who are wondering that question about how to speak Gen Z's language. And the thing I want to say is, especially for how they communicate online, this is part of their language. This is part of their grammar. Memes are grammar. Another important thing about social media and how people communicate in 2022, the kind of filter-heavy, glossy, aspirational content that has set the cultural agenda, really, for the past 5 or 6 years is, I don't quite want to say on the way out, but it's certainly trending down. We're seeing use of filters on social media decline year on year. And again, I think there's a social post that can sum it up better than I can. If you didn't see this, this is from November last year. Bella Hadid uploaded a big photo carousel of pictures of her in states like this, really, without makeup and floods of tears. And there's a long text post talking about her mental health struggles, her breakdowns and burnouts. And then you remember, we're looking at a supermodel's Instagram account, someone with more than 50 million followers, and this is the message that she is putting out into the world and that people feel comfortable reading. And I just think it's such a great symbol of the kind of content that for young people is more in demand and maybe what they're more comfortable sharing online. Now, the last thing I want to say about Gen Z is they don't know borders. Especially when it comes to the media they consume, they do not know borders. Now, I learned an interesting fact the other day, and I want to use the example of anime, type of content that comes from Japan. It's not native to the UK, to the USA, or anything like that. There's only ever been one TV channel dedicated to running anime in the UK. It was set up in 2007. It lasted for, I think, less than 12 months. Other than that, and maybe some late-night runnings on Channel 4, that was the only way that you could watch anime on the TV for most young people in this country throughout the late 90s, early noughties. For Gen Z, it's a case of going to a different menu on Netflix. They've got much fewer barriers, much fewer gatekeepers, much less friction to accessing content from different countries, different cultures, and different languages than ever before. And it's leaving a real impression. And I wanted to leave these last insights quite deliberately from the US. You know, we think of the US as this great cultural monolith, home of Hollywood, home of rock and roll, biggest media exporter in the world. And yet young people there are gravitating towards foreign content, particularly from Asia. So anime is more popular than reality TV. Crunchyroll, which is an anime-based streaming service, more popular than the home of Ted Lasso. And K-pop is almost as popular as jazz, which is probably the most American art form that there is. Now, I appreciate that was a real whistle-stop tour of a very interesting topic, very interesting group of young people. If you'd like to quiz me or my colleagues on anything you've seen here, fill in the gaps, or just reminisce about the time they did surgery on a grape, please come and find us on the picnic bench by the Campari bar. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Well done, Chris. Chris, so quick question for you, and there's an opportunity to ask questions via the app too for any of our presentations, but a quick question. I mean, you shared some great case studies there. Anime is one great example of a brand nailing this. What are some of the more traditional brands that you think are doing well when it comes to engaging with Gen Z?
On the more traditional side, I mean, what comes to mind is, I think Nike's always been the cultural leader, and I think certainly they've been able to suss out the diversity play with young people, certainly more than a lot of mainstream brands that I've seen. I think, to be fair, I think with the ones getting it right, for me, it's almost more of a long tail. I don't necessarily go to the household brands that I think of, but I think of the more online native brands who wouldn't necessarily be household names, but what they're doing in creating an audience very quickly, especially on TickTock with the kind of potential we've seen that it has, they've been able to make inroads very, very quickly. And clearly, if they wanted to grow to other audiences, they need to look elsewhere. So I appreciate it's quite a general answer, but there's certainly names associated with that world, maybe the more D2C world, that I think are getting it right, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah, cool. Brilliant. And you're hanging around, Chris?
Yes, I'll be on the picnic bench with my colleagues by the Campari bar.
Excellent. All right, well, give it up for Chris. Thank you.